find a way of charging it. And I couldn't use a normal lead-acid charger or a power supply because those things just output to a constant voltage. Another interesting thing. So this was what you see with the single cell. A battery is made up of a whole bunch of cells connected in series. And I'm going to give you here a summary of balancing and how that relates to a battery pack. So you're now not dealing with one cell, but a series of them. And a typical battery, after it's been sitting in storage for a while, will have multiple cells, but they're not all at the same state of charge. Some of them are more charged, some of them are more discharged. As the battery sits on the shelf, it gradually self-discharges, but the rate at which it self-discharges varies from cell to the next. If one cell's in a warmer part of the battery, it might discharge faster, and there's all kinds of manufacturing variations. When you charge a string of batteries that are all in series, they all charge up at exactly the same rate. So the cell that's most charged to begin with reaches its full charge first, where cells that were flatter are only 3/4 charged, and this cell reaches its full charge. As you keep charging cells like that, the one that was fully charged, then you overcharge it. But nickel-based chemistry is fairly unique. I don't know if it's unique. It has a nice feature that overcharged current just gets converted into heat, and there's chemical reactions that can take place and convert the extra current into secondary reactions that just generate heat. So those cells start to get warm, but it doesn't cause the cell to explode. It doesn't cause the cell to self-destruct or to short circuit. And if that extra current flows at a low enough rate, it gives a chance for these other cells to continue charging, while the fully charged cells just overcharge but suck it up and get warm. A similar thing can take place in discharging. So here with that previous pack, all the cells but one managed to get fully charged during that charge cycle. While the battery is discharging, you can see that this cell is going to get flat before the rest of the pack is flat. If you then continue the discharging it past that point, that flat cell still allows current to flow, enabling the rest of the cells to get flat, but it starts to get warm. And there's a reaction that takes a chemical reaction taking place that allows that to happen without causing the cell to self-destruct at low current. If you do the same process, so here what we've done is we started off with a battery pack where the cells are all at slightly different charges. We charge it once and we get 4 of the 5 at the same charge. Then we discharge it all the way until they're all flat. And now all the cells are flat together. Now when we charge it up, we have a perfectly balanced pack that will give the full rated capacity, and it's not going to have individual cells getting too hot. But if during that discharge, that one cell that goes flat is discharged at a higher current, and what's a high current, what's a low current? Well, a high current is what you see on an electric bicycle, and a low current is what you'd see if we had a triple charge discharging through a light bulb. So the realistic scenario is that when we're discharging this in an electric bicycle and one cell goes flat, that cell gets very hot and it loses capacity. And so a lower capacity cell is just a smaller cell. It can't hold as much charge. So if we discharge it at a high current, we reduce how much charge that cell can ever hold in the first place. Now when we recharge it, that cell is always going to charge up first, and it's going to get really hot while the rest of the pack reaches its full charge cycle. And then when we start to de-discharge it, it's going to go flat first, and then it's going to get really hot on the discharge end of things as well. So that poor cell, which started off being a little bit below capacity, is now getting butchered at each end of the charging and the discharging, and suffers. So knowing this information, and then as we started importing in larger quantities of batteries, we knew that we needed to condition and test these battery packs before we would supply them to people for their conversion. So over the years, we started making battery testing equipment. And so these are circuits that will discharge those batteries, monitor on a computer, let us control the current that it discharges at, identify if cells are reversing or not. In some cases, this here, there's transistors in it, discharging the battery into that aluminum heat sink, and you can control the current, which is great, but it also is prone to failure. A more robust way is to have a resistor that you drain the battery through, but it means you can't adjust the current without adjusting that resistance or having physical switches. As we got into greater and greater volumes, it then needed to handle more than one battery at a time. So the whole process of charging a battery takes maybe 6 to 8 hours, discharging it takes 2 to 3 hours, and if you wanted to cycle those batteries 6 times, as I showed you on that first pack, that's 2 or 3 days consumed just with one battery. You have to unplug it from the charger, plug in the discharger, hit go, start the computer. And I needed a method to automate that process and to handle more packs at once. So we built the 8-pack at a time charger discharge conditioner. And this is what it was used for the vast majority of the graphs that we'll be showing as this slide still progresses. So here it is. This is in, I guess, 2006, late 2006. Those are a bunch of nickel battery packs. This is a bank of power resistors that they discharge through, and then all the charge and discharge curves are being recorded on the laptop, and then each battery is plugged into the appropriate battery charger that the manufacturer supplied with it. So now I'm going to show you some of the things that we learned from this process. The one thing is that off the boat, anywhere between 20 to 50% of the batteries on their first discharge would have cell reversals. So this is where we have, in this case, there's 30 cells, 36-volt battery, and you can see as we're discharging it, one cell goes flat before the remainder of the pack starts to go flat. In some situations, you can see that on the first discharge, so here's a great example where as we receive the battery off the boat, the first cell that failed dropped out at just 3 amp hours, so just about a quarter of the way into the capacity it was supposed to have. We then just continued the discharge, and we did this discharge with a very low current. C over 4, so in this case it's just happening at 2 or 3 amps of current. Recharge the battery. The next time we discharge it, that's the green line. That one cell, which at first only gave 2.5 amp hours, now gave 10 amp hours. But it still gives less than the rest of the pack, which delivered the full 12. Discharge it, charge it again. On the third cycle, it's now improved to the point where it's giving about 11 amp hours. But it never, in this case, achieved the same capacity as the remaining cells in the battery pack. But it certainly improved quite a bit. Had this been on an electric bicycle on its first discharge, and this reversal happened when there was 20 amps of current flowing through, that cell would have had a fate, a very short, long-lived fate. And here you can see some examples of those cells that reverse. Often they'll, when they have this secondary reaction going on, the pressure builds up, and so it causes the cell to vent at one of the safety caps and leak electrolytes. So sometimes the batteries are enclosed in heat sinks, so you wouldn't necessarily know that there had been cell damage, but sometimes I could hear gurgling going on during the discharge. Quick question?
Is this still nickel?
This is still nickel, yeah. Yeah, lithium is going to be the second half of that presentation. And in other cases, it improves almost completely. So this is a nickel 48-volt battery pack on its first discharge, a reversal at 6, a reversal at 7, another just before 8. And then on the second discharge, there's just a hint of a reversal at 8, the purple line. And on the third discharge, it's a perfectly smooth gradation. So the whole pack is both balanced and matched for capacity. So this is a good news situation. Sometimes it wasn't. Sometimes that cell would never improve when we cycled it. So we'd have to identify the bad cell and replace it before we would supply it to a customer. So even though they would never know the difference, if you have a cell reverse on you, you're riding your bike, you lose a volt and a half. It's not apparent. It could feel a tiny bit more sluggish, but no one would really clue in. Yeah, and it wasn't even always obvious looking at the cells which one had failed. So this was a case where a customer bought a pack from us that we had tested and found that it was pretty good. And after about 150 cycles, she said it was no longer giving nearly the same range it did originally. So we